I'm Brandon Vaidyanathan, and this is Beauty at Work, the podcast that seeks to expand our understanding of beauty, what it is, how it works, and why it matters for the work we do. This season of the podcast is sponsored by John Templeton Foundation and Templeton Religion Trust. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beauty at Work. The next series of episodes are going to be presentations from an interdisciplinary symposium that we organized at McGill University in Montreal on spiritual yearning in a disenchanted age. We had the great honor of working with Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor, who's considered among the world's most important living philosophers, to discuss key themes from his new book, Cosmic Connections, Poetry in the Age of Disenchantment. In this first episode, you'll hear an introduction to the symposium from me, and a word about the broader project on spiritual yearning that is funded by the John Templeton Foundation from Dr. Sarah Lane Ritchie, who oversees this initiative. Following that, we'll hear from Charles Taylor, who is Professor Emeritus at McGill University. Taylor is best known for his contributions to political philosophy, philosophy of social science, the history of philosophy, and intellectual history, notably through books such as Sources of the Self and A Secular Age. He has received numerous honors, including the Kyoto Prize, the Templeton Prize, and the Berggruen Prize for philosophy. We also have a poetry reading from Marie Trotter, a doctoral candidate in English at McGill University, who will share a couple of original poems. Let's get started. Let me just say hello and welcome to everyone. My name is Brandon Vaidyanathan. I'm a sociologist at the Catholic University of America, and it's a great honor and privilege to be here to try to put this event together, which I couldn't have done without Dan Siri. I want to thank you, Dan, for helping make this possible, and to Garth for hosting us here. Garth is there. We are for hosting us in religious studies. Sincere thanks to the John Templeton Foundation for founding this, and to Charles for suggesting this idea to bring some people together to think through some of the themes that emerge out of Cosmic Connections, and as you'll see, have a lot of resonance with an initiative that we're working on through this project at JTF on spiritual yearning among the non-religious. Let me say a word about what this event is about. Charles's new book, Cosmic Connections, as he describes it, is about the human need for cosmic connection, which means not just any mode of awareness of the surrounding world, but one shot through with joy, significance, and inspiration. And Taylor's hypothesis is that the desire for this connection may be a human constant, but one that takes on different forms in different times and different places. And Cosmic Connections explores poetry, particularly in romantic poetry, as one pathway to this cosmic connection, but what might be some other pathways that people are pursuing now? And that kind of pursuit is very much related to this initiative at the John Templeton Foundation on spiritual yearning among the non-religious. And I'm going to bother Sarah Lane Ritchie perhaps to say a word about the initiative, and I can say a little bit about how the resonance between that project and Cosmic Connection. So,
my name is Sarah Lane Ritchie. I'm the Program Officer for Philosophy and Theology at the John Templeton Foundation. Just a quick word about me. Templeton has me on board basically to do all the weird stuff, like the non-traditional philosophy and theology stuff. My own background is in science and religion. I did my doctoral work and my postdoctoral work in Edinburgh in science and religion, looking at versions of expansive naturalism that would make room, make space for all the things that we desire from religion and spiritual pathways. So when I came to Templeton, I immediately began developing this new initiative that would take seriously the spiritual needs, pursuits, yearnings of the spiritual but not religious crowd, the religious nuns, the duns, basically people who were serious about spiritual pursuits, meaning-making, transcendence, but didn't find a home for themselves in traditional religions. And out of that, basically out of my own 3 a.m. existential crises, the Spiritual Yearning Research Initiative was born. It's been going on for a couple years now. Brandon is one of our grantees in this initiative. So we call it SYRI, not Siri, SYRI. The Spiritual Yearning Research Initiative is just a big theme for us right now. We are aiming to do both descriptive, empirical, and normative work. So we're trying to bring the best of philosophy and theology, religious studies and ethics into conversation with psychology, sociology, and anthropology. And again, take seriously the needs of people who have authentic spiritual desires and pursuits, but don't really know what to do, don't really know what their resources are. So there's a lot of history involved. Increasingly, we're trying to help people reclaim what is out there already. and to not feel like they have to rely on Saturday morning yoga. And we're also trying to challenge sort of the dominant cultural narratives that the spiritual but not religious crowd is unserious, that they are overly relativistic or into, if it feels good, do it. So that's what we're doing. So my own work is, at the moment, is really just continuing this initiative, developing it in new directions. And I have to say, Charles Taylor's work has been infused in almost all of the projects that we see coming through our door. And so when Brandon told me that this event was happening, I basically invited myself. And I was like, please, can I come to your party? Because it would be lovely to be in a room full of people who are devoted to discussing this topic and around a figure that has been so influential in my own work, but also the initiative as a whole. And is the most frequently cited person in all of the grants that we're running in this program. So thanks very much for having me. I'm around all day. If you would like to talk about your own work, your own projects, grant ideas, that's my whole job. So feel free to catch me.
Yeah, really delighted you could join us, Sarah. And yeah, so there's really just so much resonance, I think, between this initiative and the new book. And we are also, and the other pretext for our getting together was another event we're planning, another grant we're applying for on beauty and trying to think about the role of beauty and the kind of drawing on particularly the kind of aesthetic realism that you develop in Cosmic Connections. And this is Tara Isabella Burton and I are working on the new initiative to do some large-scale surveys as well as field work in different sites like the Venice Carnival and Burning Man-like places and sacred music choirs and a variety of sites to understand what happens with collective aesthetic experience. How are we moved by experiences of beauty together? And again, I think there are a lot of themes from Cosmic Connections that are very germane to that project, which we'd love to discuss later on in the day. Maybe very briefly, we'll go around and say who everyone is, just so we know who each other is over here. And then we'll jump right in to a couple of poems by Marie Trotter, who's a doctoral candidate here in the English department and a poet. And then Charles will invite you to share a little bit about the motivations for Cosmic Connections and then some of the themes that resonate with you as we're thinking about the conversation today. And then we'll have Naomi Fisher, who is an associate professor of philosophy at Loyola Chicago, Robert Gilbert, professor of biophysics at Oxford, and then myself in the first session. We'll take a break around 10:45. There's a minute of silence for Remembrance Day at 11. Maybe some loud cannonballs are around that time as well. And then the second session we'll have Marie open us again with another poem or two. And Tara Isabella Burton, who's now she's a novelist and theologian, but also now we're honored to have her as a research fellow and lecturer at Catholic University. David McPherson can't be here in person. Unfortunately, his flight was canceled. So if there's a way to Zoom him in, we could talk about it and see if he could join us that way. Bill Barbieri, professor of ethics at Catholic U, and Galen Watts, who has a really compelling set of considerations for us to close out this session with this afternoon, and then we'll break for lunch. After lunch, we'll come back to discuss some of the key themes that have emerged during our conversation, as well as this future project on beauty and what we might do, in ways we might collaborate together as we move that initiative forward. Any questions before we get started? Great. Well, welcome, everyone. Delighted to have you here, and I think this will be a fantastic interdisciplinary conversation. So without further ado, then, we'll have Marie come on up, and we can get started.
So I'll first say that when I read poetry in other contexts, it's customary to snap to show appreciation, but I will not ask for that here. I think it might change the mood. So silence is totally acceptable. This first poem is called Things Are Good. Things are good. She and I don't talk anymore. But yesterday, the baby lay on my lap and pretended to swim, waving wildly one little limb, and left behind a bubble on my knee. The trains are still running. They work more often than not. And though my wallet had run dry, the driver let me on. My body began its monthly song. Thereupon a thankful wringing of the sheets. Things are good. If I ask him, he sings, or whispers unexpectedly the only words I want to hear. I finished once again the mystery I read for the first time last year in fall. I'd forgotten about the flood that ended it all. Bodies washed up on the fen from the raging river that broke the bridges and dams and filled the streets. An act of God, that nature functioned as it should. So again I say, Things are good. This poem is called Creators. The silver coin moon is blurring at the edges, as if God, after drawing, took the side of his fist and smudged it across the sky. His hands are stained, all colors, dark blue, and metal flecks, and thin orange bands of sunset, crossing veins of rose and mauve and gold. He has traced a line along the streets and alleyways. Their pavements exhale dust in the summer heat, traces of creation's footsteps rising skyward. He has filled the backyard fences with lilacs. He has lined every alley with pale purple blooms, bursting forth to be seen, their sweet scent to be noted. Summer sighs and unfolds in the uncurling of his fingers. How easily he begets beauty. My hands, less eager to make the sights I wish to devour with my eyes, beat out a halting rhythm upon a screen. Words, words and more words, imperfect thanksgiving for everything that is warmth and light. Thank you.
I've been sort of working on this kind of problem all my life. Because to start in the middle, more or less in the middle, one of the books I wrote was A Secular Age. And the thesis was that not the secularizing thesis that religion is disappearing, but very much that religious life is mutating. And what I tried to point to as a new phenomenon was the phenomenon of religious seekers. And it's people who had very strong intuition somewhere that there was more to it all than standard, naturalistic, or however you want to describe it, view of the world allowed to exist. But that this is filled with people who were seeking. This is a really remarkable thing. So this is a kind of banality now. And in this room, this is, announcing something that everybody takes for granted. In a certain way, their starting position. And to be a little bit more autobiographical, this intuition started, not writing the book called The Secular Age, but this intuition started really when I was finishing my first degree here and heading off for Oxford. And it started because I myself was pitched into a path of searching. I was brought up here in Quebec, in the Catholic Church. I'm on my mother's side, I'm a member of a very large, spreading Quebecois family. And we went to church every Sunday in Outremont, Saint-Viateur, and you know that. And so I had kind of a first-hand experience, but not really first-hand because the family was very relaxed. My father was Protestant, and there were also some people married into the family who were other than Quebecois Catholics and so on. So the rule, nobody said this to me, but not looking back, the rule was we just, accepted each other and worked with each other and sometimes loved each other and sometimes fought with each other. So as big families do, right? But nevertheless, I got a sense of what was going on by listening to the sermons at Saint-Viateur, which were far from the worst sermons preached in Quebecois churches. But then I also looked on at the politics of the time. Duplessis, who was really using people's fear of foreign religions in order to stir up the vote for the Union Nationale, and everything terrible that he was doing. So one of the things that I started adolescence, my political life, I actually joined the Provincial Liberal Party because of the fighting écraser l'infâme. Our version of that was defeating Duplessis. But then, luckily enough, I existed in the culture that one of the cultures that was creating the Nouvelle Théologie that would be the basis of Vatican II. or I was listening, we were overhearing that culture. That theology, Dudubak, Congar, this was created by Dominicans and Jesuits, mostly, of course, living in France. But the thing is about these particular orders, that the Dominicans and Jesuits of Quebec had a very close relation. You really didn't get anywhere unless you did graduate work in Dominican in the Sauchois or in Paris and so on. So we began to read these texts before the world at large had heard about them. I was back in, so I was an undergraduate here in the, when was that? It was in 49 to a few years after that. Right? And this, they completely gave me another kind of inspiration. The second inspiration that I got was also at McGill at that time, and actually in this building. The great Islamic scholar Wilfred Cantwell Smith was here. And actually, he ended up founding here the Islamic Institute and a couple of streets over. And his course was on, comparative religion, I guess is the word. But what I was taking honors history, but I thought this is an elective course. This sounds interesting. And it was, to me, absolutely riveting. He was not one for tremendous rhetorical flourishes or for tremendous poetic invocations, but he wore a gown, which nobody else did at McGill, and he'd walk up and down like that. But he gave you a sense of what it was to be a Muslim, a Buddhist. He went through a whole lot of very famous, well-known spiritual paths, and it was riveting because without that high-flown, I don't know how he did it exactly, without any sort of high-flown rhetoric, he gave you a sense of what it was to be a Muslim, a Jew, a Buddhist, a Hindu, and so on. And I was absolutely, as I said, riveted by that. It was something that I really needed to know. I didn't know why I needed to know it, and I don't quite know, can't necessarily say even today why I needed to know it. But I guess the trace in my life of that course and of all the other considerations that I had to go through, I had to sort of switch the whole basis of my Christian faith, right? Well, I didn't really have a very powerful Christian faith before, but I got one thanks to Congar and Dudubak. The working out of this was the big agenda, but I've discovered that I needed both the Nouvelle Théologie on one hand and Will Smith on the other, because I discovered that one of the most deepening experiences in my life has been close contact and close discussion and with people from these other spiritual paths. And so in a certain sense, there is going on in me a kind of encounter with, in some situations, Buddhism, in other situations, certain kind of Sufi Islam, in other situations, certain kind of bhakti, love of God, and so on. That the sense of being accompanied by these other voices is always there. And this is, maybe people will consider this very weird, but Christian faith, my own Christian faith, comes even more alive when these voices are with me as well, right? And these other points of reference. And just to give a sense of that, the other day I had, there's a television program in which Desmond Tutu met with the Dalai Lama. And something extraordinary emerged from that because they were both joking about the differences of their religious paths, and they were both immensely enjoying this joking, and it sounded very, in a way, frivolous, maybe, and making of the whole issue of frivolity. But the backdrop of this, as it were, the undertone of this whole thing was their calm and passionate commitment to a certain way of, we Christians would reach for the notion of agape, but the thing that you felt was there's something that brought us together. No, I'm talking now brought them together, but I'm talking of the resonances in me, something which brought us together in what we would call agape, but for instance, a Buddhist might call karuna, which are not very far apart, except that the spiritual sources that put people into this are diverse. Somehow, when all these voices are singing together in a certain sense, singing together this song of love, affirmation of the human, our desire to create a just condition for people who are suffering very badly from some kind of persecution, and then you have people who are not at all in any particular religious tradition, who are part of the same sense, that where we feel encouraged by are hearing all these voices. So I don't expect this to be this description of what's going on in me and how to come about to be necessarily comprehensible to other people. But I just sense very much in this room, it probably is very comprehensible. So it's a peculiar position, right, in which there's one dimension of the faith, my faith, which is sacramental, and that's a path. But the fact that it can be and is accompanied by knowing other people, exchanging with other people who are on another kind of almost parallel path, and that the sense of mutual enrichment is created from this, is a very important part of my spiritual life. And then, of course, there are doubts. There's a sense of a possible loss. And I think the way, for me, various forms of people call it mysticism in Christianity, I'm thinking of San Juan de la Cruz, St. John of the Cross, that is also another voice playing from the past, from a quite different culture, but very much the same basic symbols. And so I want to throw one more thing into the mix. There is the struggle with doubt, the struggle with potential loss of these very powerful, St. John called the Noche Oscura, the dark night. The experience contains a number of dark nights in a way that I have to admit, there's a darkness that I'm always struggling with. Okay, so very, very complicated. It was incomprehensible to the Père Curé of my childhood that one could have such a religious life. But that's why I feel an immense distance from that kind of, from the bon curé. Some of them are really good, and their hearts are overflowing with real love for their parishioners. But I mean, there's the picture of the paradigm bon curé telling his flock that they had to have, few more children or whatever it was, all the misogynistic elements of that. So anyway, all that is, so it's not simple. My point is just, it's not I can't give you two pithy sentences. With this circular biography, starting off as a kid in the Bon de Saint-Viateur and where I am now, but all of that is working at the same time. Because there's another dimension of the sense I have of the spiritual, which is our relation to the cosmos, right? A relationship that somehow has emerged, you might almost say, from the cosmos as well as from various religious revelations over time has emerged certain very powerful insights which have transformed us in history. And, of course, the thing that in the 20th century we came to be find as a reference point of this was ethical development looking from and to the axial period, what Jaspers called the axial period, where you have something which steps, I think, very much steps forward, which are very similar to each other. And we might have the usual model in our minds of civilizational history. People start off very primitive, and then they develop further. And the fact that these appeared in 4 centers, maybe 5 if you want to include Persia, is obviously to be explained, people think, by diffusion. Somebody got the idea. So we have our great figures, Christ, and we have Confucius, and we have Buddha, and so on. And people ran with the message. Well, yeah, they did actually run with the message, but the thing that Jaspers picked up on, it couldn't have spread just by people running with the message. There's too much simultaneity, contemporaneity between these breakthroughs. And so something else is working in human history. And I don't know if you can identify it. There are different theories. From a Christian point of view, Irenaeus has the idea of God giving a certain pedagogy to human beings. But the idea that people would normally have had of this is, well, yes, Christian message, and then it spread outward. Or from a Chinese point of view, someone might say, well, Confucius had all these ideas, and then they spread out. And they did. And the Buddha, the idea spread, and it did. But that doesn't account, the point that Jaspers had, that doesn't account for the way in which the simultaneity, the step forward. And we could go into what's special about the axial age, but I think we all have a sense of it. The way in which it's working is not simply that. For some reason, in some center, some genius or whatever got these visions, these ideas, and then other people ran with the wall, as it were, and carried it elsewhere. Yeah, that certainly happened, but something bigger and different happened. Somehow, these basic inspirations and steps forward, they happen beyond that. I mean, they happen in several places at once. And there's actually a chapter in the last book I call The History of Ethical Growth, in which I follow this out, and the kind of strange way in which certain insights begin to work, and they remain for a long time, carried out by minorities, by precisely bhikkhus or very dedicated saint-like figures, or by followers of the Buddha and so on. And they certainly do spread that way. But there's also a deeper push forward, which takes the form of suddenly conceiving the demands of these spiritualities together as becoming suddenly very much more demanding, so that out of the axial period, you get, in many cases, a certain distaste for certain class differences, and particularly slavery, but it becomes tolerated by ordinary people, or nonviolence, yes, for certain people. And in Christendom, it meant that monks and clergy shouldn't take up arms and so on, though there were famous cases of, mace-wielding bishops and so on, but it was considered to be strange. But on the other hand, people said, well, you can't ask everybody to give up slavery. I mean, how will the economy run? They've got to be practical. And then suddenly in the 18th century, we get this flip in which it becomes very quickly, anyway, certainly in Western civilization in this particular case, it becomes very quickly something that unconscionable. Never practice this. Same thing goes, not the same thing exactly, but it's kind of similar shift when it comes to violence. Right? Once again, in Christendom and in many civilizations, really dedicated spiritual figures weren't supposed to engage in warfare. No, it's terrible. But on the other hand, how do you run the world, without it? And then along comes a figure called Gandhi. And this extraordinary spread, Gandhi to Martin Luther King to many other figures, so that the remarkable thing is how in the 20th century we've had a series of overturning of very terrible regimes, deserved very much overturning, without any violence. It's a remarkable fact that all those Bolshevik regimes in Eastern Europe, which were very, very violent, held their population under, that with the exception of the Romanian dictator, they all were overturned without spreading blood. Quite remarkable. No, we're very far, and we have a long way to go. And perhaps you could even argue that these kind of steps forward produce even worse denials, which are, even more, because the 20th century, I can't say we're all better. I mean, the 20th century is just horrifying spilling of blood. But there are these moves forward. And, we're now in an epoch when our democracies are all threatened by reaction against the attempt to produce more just and universally concerned societies. And you get everywhere there. We just had one of these reactions very close by. So we heard the blast from here. But nevertheless, a marker is put down. New demands are being made and so on. I think that there are these relations to our whole planet, to the spiritual lives that are alive in our planet. And what I wanted to show in the book was that in the particular department of our sense of connection to our larger cosmos, to our larger home, actually there's been one of these new moves. But this new move, the move of the cosmic connection of the authors I tried to cite in the 19th and 20th century, these moves are attempts to redo or to compensate for a loss of other kinds of connection that existed before, like the visions of the great chain of being of the cosmic order, so that there is this very strange kind of universal, which you can perhaps show in this domain of our relation to the cosmos, but I'm running this in some ways parallel to the ethical development from the axial period. You can in some ways show, and I wanted to put on the agenda. The whole thing was, first of all, because it's a lot of very beautiful poetry and also other works of art, but and I want to put that on the agenda. But you also have this kind of question: what is it about our relation to the cosmos? Is it just how we feel now, and they have another feeling then, and so on? Or is it something more substantial, more that draws together indigenous spiritualities at one end of history, way back, and these various forms that I'm trying to uncover in the 19th and 20th century? And this is a huge question mark. All these huge question marks. What is it? But my very strong intuition is that there is something constant here, constant but changing along with the cultural surroundings in which these intuitions occur. And so there are many more questions here than there are answers, but so we're making a parallel here between the kind of ethical development across the ages and the implicit issue of what is the draw on us of sense of cosmic connection again, across the ages and across different cultures, very different forms, and we're a little bit stumped. Don't know where to go to explain this or to give it, but it's a important question that we should think of, that we should know.
All right, folks, that's a wrap for this episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please share it with someone who would find it of interest. Also, please subscribe and leave us a review if you haven't already. Thanks, and see you next time.